Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video, and in today's video I want to talk some more about the new Leviathan Raid, and more importantly, now that my team and I have had time to perfect our strategies, I wanted to share some updated tips with you that will help make your raid completions much cleaner and easier. Obviously, as the weeks go on and we begin to rack up more and more completions, we'll likely find ways to refine our strategies even further, or better optimize our rotations. But for those of you that watched my original guide, and perhaps are still having a few troubles, then hopefully this video will help. However, before I get started, I do want to emphasize that this is by no means the only way to do things, and when I recommend certain weapons, they are also not the only weapons you can or should use. The idea of this video isn't to try and propagate some sort of elitist strategy whereby if you're not doing this, then you're doing it wrong. On the contrary, if you're missing a weapon, simply swap it out for whatever else you have and adapt the strategy to fit your team. Also, I'm making this video based on the assumption that you at least have a basic understanding of the encounters from my original guide, so if not, be sure to give that a watch, link down below, and then pick up here once you're done. Of course, if you do find this helpful and you do enjoy it, then a like would be super appreciated, and be sure to comment down below if you have any more questions. Now to begin with, in at number 5, we're going to start outside in the Castellum, the part that breaks up your raid encounters, where you need to kill standard bearers to collect their standards from the respective doors, and then slam all 3 into the plate to open the door to your next encounter. I appreciate this part of the raid isn't exactly difficult, however, since my first guide, we've somewhat altered the way that we run this room. Originally, I suggested splitting your team into 2 and 4. The squad of 2 retrieves the standards, meanwhile the 4 defend the plate, since it can get a little bit hectic. But on the subsequent runs, it became very clear that it's only really towards the end that it becomes a little hectic and you need that stronger defense. So, to speed up the process, we actually begin by splitting the team down the middle, 3 and 3. Your defender team can hold the plate to begin with, while the other 3 go off and collect the standard. The additional DPS from the collection team means that your standard bearer can go down quickly, in turn allowing you to return quicker, and thus leaving less time for adds to spawn for the defending team. You repeat this process for the second run, however it's at this point where things do begin to get a little more hectic. So upon taking down the second standard bearer, you have one of your members of the collection crew take the standard and return to the plate, and they then join the defending squad. This then means that you're down to 2 for the final third standard bearer, but since the defending team now has bolstered numbers, it's easier to hold out while the other 2 retrieve the last standard. So essentially, the only difference in this rotation is that to begin with, your teams are 3 and 3, and then for the final one, it is down to 2 and 4. Again, as mentioned, this room isn't immensely difficult, and I imagine by now most of you likely don't need to do much here if you're already getting through it. But the way that we have been running it more recently means it's done in a matter of minutes without any unnecessary setbacks. Moving on from there, in at number 4, we have the Royal Baths. This is another relatively straightforward fight, and it's also very possible to do this in just one rotation, provided you're high enough power level and are using appropriate weapons. I've seen a couple of different variations on strategies for this room. One of the popular ones seems to be having a rotation whereby your left team and right teams essentially rotate roles, meaning on any given side someone can be in one of 3 different places. And while that works for some teams, we found by far the cleanest and easiest way to do it, especially if you're running with newer players that might not have done the raid before, is simply to have people assigned to fixed positions. By having someone own a plate, then the only thing they need to worry about is managing adds for a bit and refreshing their buff when it's low. I suggest taking your 2 highest power level players and having them be the roaming guardians. By roaming, I mean quite simply, they begin the encounter by helping the top plates with their bather, and they then stand on the plate while the plate holder goes in the middle to refresh their buff. Upon returning, the roamer then moves to the bottom plate to assist there, and then allow that player to refresh their buff. Since the roamers have spent considerably less time in the water, then by the time the second plate holder returns, it'll be their turn to refresh. The nice thing about running it like this is that in a Sherpa situation, or a scenario where you are just running with new players, the roaming players can be the most experienced ones, since they'll be jumping around the room, meanwhile the other 4 players have one very particular job to do, and there is far less juggling to worry about. If done correctly, you'll find that within about 2 rotations you'll be locked in, and ready to move into the middle, and at this point, this is your opportunity to one-phase it. The only thing that'll really slow down your DPS are the adds that spawn, so if one of your team focuses solely on them, ideally with some sort of destructive super, something you can spam, so Titan Sunbreaker, Titan Striker, maybe even an Arc Strider, anything like that, then you can have 5 people focusing on the canisters. Sure, with 1 less person shooting, your overall damage output is slightly lower, but since the canisters aren't exactly strong, it's not actually a big deal. Provided you're not getting pushed around or knocked out the circle by adds, then you literally only have to focus on shooting. If this encounter is going to go wrong in any way, it is typically when adds will knock the team up the air, they'll then end up outside the circle, and without realising it, they'll then be standing in the water for too long and they will die. So by doing it this way, it just makes things a lot cleaner. Now, if you have Merciless, that pretty much melts the canisters. Again, as mentioned in the beginning, Merciless is not a requirement, but since Zur sold it this week, it is fair to assume that a lot of players will now have it. In fact, Zur is actually still there right now. Turns out, unlike in Destiny 1, he now stays there till reset, so if you haven't got it, you still have time. He's there right now, on Nessus, up the tree. But in the event you don't have it, and maybe you're watching this video in a week's time, then just grab whatever heavy weapon you have. Snipers are pretty good. That Saurus one that I recommended in my top 5 legendary weapons video is pretty potent. But either way, the general consensus for this fight is that clearly defined roles make it much easier to manage, and also much easier to teach. Now, moving on from there to number 3, and arguably the more interesting stuff. The stuff that actually presents a challenge. We have the Pleasure Gardens, aka the dogs. This is one encounter that I'm super glad we managed to perfect, because in truth, during our very first completion, while we obviously did it, I felt like it was super messy, and trying to explain the best way to do it afterwards also left me thinking that there must have been a better way to go about it, and luckily there is. In fact, this encounter went from being one of the hardest to one of the easiest if you have just a little patience. Originally, I recommended that you damage the dogs, get them as low as possible, but don't kill them, so as to avoid the restless phase. This then meant that you needed to make frequent trips back to the safe room before you ultimately moved on to kill. But the way we do it now doesn't even require use of the safe room, and we do it in one rotation. Again, if you saw the original guide, you will know that this fight revolves around sneaking around the map with spores and standing by the flowers so that your crystal bearers can zap them to give you a buff. Each flower gives you about 12 stacks, provided everyone is grouped. Originally, we hit 3 flowers, since a stack of 36 gave us plenty enough damage boost to get the dogs low, and then allow us to finish them later. But now, we aim higher. See, in the very first rotation, when the dogs have just come out, you actually have a great deal of time. So taking the extra time, sneak around the map to get, say, 6 flowers to get a stack of 60, is going to allow you to kill them all in one phase, without even having to go near the safe room. But before you get there, you need to organise your team. See, when the dogs are alerted, they run back to their respective flowers. There are 8 flower locations, but only 6 dogs, and those 6 dogs have fixed locations. Reddit user Coke Godly actually put together this really handy map. I've left a link to his Reddit post in the description box down below, be sure to check that out. But you can see right here, the dogs are the little red icons, and they are placed next to their respective flowers. There is one to the closest left flower, one to the back left, one in the middle in what we call mid-forest, one on the close right, and 2 at the back in the right corner. What you do is you assign a dog or a flower to each member of your team. That dog is their responsibility. They don't have to worry about anything else other than to run to that location and kill it. With this in mind, it means that when they are alerted, your team can split up and they run to where they need to go to get their single job done. See, with a stack of 60 or even higher, it is very easy to solo a dog. If you have Merciless, then it is an absolute cakewalk, but even if you don't, with a stack that high, supers, grenades, rockets, anything powerful you have will melt their health. So in order to pull this off, this is what you do. You begin the phase by picking up the crystals and the spores. Crystal holders call out the nearest flowers, and your team systematically begins sneaking around, building up the stacks. Remember that once a flower has been used, other ones can activate. So if there's, say, nothing on the left to begin with, once some of the right ones have been used, the left ones will show up. So there will always be flowers for you to use. Take your time and sneak around until you have at least 60 stacks. At this point, you have 2 options. Since the way the fight plays out means that when you're seen, it's time to fight, you can actually use the spare time to go for even higher stacks after 60 just to make it easier. I mean, if you're seen and you mess it up, then you just go straight to damage. So really, there's no harm trying. Also, quick shout out to my buddy WiLLiSGaming for the footage on this bit. Since I'm up top holding the crystal, I want to show you guys what it's like down on the floor in the jungle, so to speak. And in our team, Willis was part of the Spore team. So I've left a link to Willis's YouTube channel in the description box down below and his Twitter. Be sure to check him out for more Destiny videos. But whatever you decide, once you have enough stacks, it is simply a case of getting spotted and running to your flowers. Now, whatever you do, don't try and attack the dogs where they stand, because this is how things get confusing. Sometimes the dogs need to run back to their flowers. If you try and attack them in the middle of the jungle and you, say, mess up their pathing, then it can get a little confusing. So it's important to remember that dogs will always run back to their flowers. So simply run there, find your dog, and shoot it till it's dead. Since you're going for a 1-phase rotation, you can afford to stay out a little bit longer to ensure you get the kill, but more importantly, communicate with your team. When someone gets a kill, call it out. Run to someone else's location, see if they need help. If anyone still hasn't killed their dog, call out, because others can run to you. This is sort of a high-risk, high-reward strategy, since if you're not using the safe room, then it's all or nothing. And while that might sound like it makes it more complicated, trust me, it is so much easier than having to systematically whittle down the dogs across, say, 2 or 3 rotations, before then going in for the kill. There is far less to go wrong in this strategy. So in summary, get a stack of 60 on your spores from 6 flowers, assign 1 dog to each team member, once at 60 or higher, run to your locations and kill. If done right, it'll be over before you know it. Now, moving on from there to number 4, the big man himself, Emperor Callas. Again, another fight that felt a little scrappy on first completion, but now that we have it down, it's actually a pretty clean run. In fact, the entire raid now just takes us around 45 to 50 minutes. For Callas, again, the damage you deal hinges on the stacks that you can build in the other dimension. But it's what happens outside that can really help shape this fight. Much like in my original guide, you will still divide your team into 2 teams of 3. One team is the home team, they will grab the orbs when teleported and come back into the boss room. The other team is the Dimension team and will focus on killing Scions and then Skulls. The thing about the Callas fight though, is that the speed at which you take down his shield dictates the time that the Dimension team have to kill Skulls. So if you're too quick, you're actually missing out on a ton of damage. And what's nice is that if you delay taking down the shield, it actually gives you a lot more time to clear ads. See, the outside can get a little hectic if you're trying to clear ads and DPS a shield and try not to die. So why not make the whole process easier? Deal with the ads first, then focus on the shield. I appreciate the impending doom from his Spirit Bomb makes you want to deal with it fast, but the timing is actually pretty generous. What our team ended up doing was waiting till the stacks got to around 40 or 50, you can see that on the outside by looking on the left, and it was at this point that we started dealing damage. Obviously the longer you're outside, the more health goes down, so what we actually did was sacrificed a little bit of damage and had our Warlock switch to a healing rift, since if you stand in it, then the damage dealt to you during Callas' Spirit Bomb shield phase is actually just healed. So during this phase, if you wait till 50 and then begin damaging a shield, get it super low and then wait for as long as you possibly can, and then finish the last bit. If done well, this should give your team inside enough time to get a stack of say 80 plus skulls, which is insane damage potential. I will at this point strongly recommend using Cold Heart here if you have it. Again, if you don't, then just go for your strongest weapon, but Cold Heart is so powerful in this final fight. It is great for taking down skulls, great for taking down Callas' shield, and even great for dealing damage to him during the damage phase. Either way, if you manage to pull this off, then when you're onto the damage phase, you will more than likely be able to take off half of his health in one rotation. It is actually possible to one-phase Callas and completely kill him on a single rotation, but for this you really need to be pushing about 100 skulls, and if you can do that, perfect. But if not, then 2 phases is still clean and very manageable. So in summary, you would play out the fight like normal, split your team into 2, once you've called out the symbols and dealt with the science stage of the fight, in the boss room, clear ads, in the dimension room, stay alive. When the shield phase begins, group up in the boss room by one of the pillars and drop a Warlock healing rift to mitigate the damage over time. Inside, try and get as many skulls as possible. When you see the number hit 40 to 50, the later the better, begin taking down his shield with Cold Heart, stop just before the end to give the inside team a little bit more time, and then when you feel like you're really running out of time, just finish it off. Everyone leaves, groups up on the same plate, and you dish out as much damage as possible, and again, if done correctly, this will have them down in 1 to 2 rotations, and since you're giving each party more time, it actually makes the fight much easier. Then finally, in at number 5, this is just a quick one, and is a variation on the strat we just spoke about, but something else you can do if you're really confident in your team is only send 2 people back to the boss room after a teleport. Sure, there are 3 orbs, but they don't all need to be taken. If you send your 2 highest power level players outside, between them, they can handle the ads and take on the counsellors. That then means there are 4 people inside the dimension. That's 1 extra person to shoot skulls. Of course, if you do this, it also means that 4 people will see symbols on Callas' head. 1 of them will be a duplicate, so you'll need to factor this in, or identify the duplicate person early on, and then they no longer need to call out. This means in the skull phase, you can rack up the skull stack much quicker, and if you paired that with the delayed shield takedown, you will easily hit 100 skulls. I will, however, say, this last one is a more advanced strategy, because staying alive and managing ads on the outside with only 2 people is no easy feat. So try this if you want a challenge, but failing that, then the Callas strategy we just spoke about is by far the easiest and cleanest way to go about it. But that, my friends, is pretty much it. Those are 5 tips to help make your Leviathan Raid completions considerably easier and more straightforward. Hopefully this helped. If you have any questions, by all means let me know. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.